Hi, I'm Colin Wiggins, and I'm sitting here with David Dawson, who is a long-term friend and professional assistant to Lucian Freud, and is probably the most acquainted with Lucian's work and also Lucian the man, more than anybody else in the world. So I'd like to start, David, by asking when you first came into Lucian's life.
I just graduated from the Royal College of Art in the painting course, and the professor, Paul Huxley, said, why not do 3 mornings a week with an art dealer? That art dealer was James Kirkman.
Right.
I didn't know that was Lucian's dealer.
Yes.
James then said, come and meet. I work for, I represent Lucian. Come and meet Lucian. So we went over to Holland Park.
Yes.
Met Lucian, and we got on, myself and Lucian, we just really got on. And he just phoned me from that day on. And then he just said, come round. And then after 2 or 3 visits, he said, come into my studio. And I walked in, and there was the big painting of Lee, the first big painting of Lee Bowery on the easel. And it knocked me out. It was quite a strong moment for me. And it developed from there. So it's very much a working friendship that just developed over the years.
And of course, you're in several of Lucian's most important paintings, the ones with quite thick paint, where you can see the marks as your body is translated into paint.
Yeah.
But the first question I'd like to ask you is, how much is he guiding you? Is he saying, can you move your arm up there, or could you look over in this direction?
He very, very little. I mean, you have 2 or 3 attempts always before the painting becomes the painting that he hopes might see through to the end. And it's very much about, just move your arm a little bit. He wants to try and make you feel very unself-conscious, so you're just there, and he lets you breathe, and he lets you be you, and that's when he can get going. That's what gives him freedom then as an artist, is when you're totally being yourself. And then that magic or whatever is the little moment that gives him the spark to see what a painting could be.
And does he let you see the work before it's finished?
For me, yes. Not for every sitter, I don't think. But all the paintings he did of me were very large, so he always had to be on the side. I could always see the canvas on side. Right. So it's fascinating for me. So I saw every single brush mark being made, put down. But again, also, the studio is incredibly private, so it's only ever Lucian and the sitter. The doors were always closed. So if I was there, as his assistant, I would never be in the studio when he was painting someone else. Right. It was a very, very private moment with the sitter, just Lucian and the sitter, and it was about their relationship. I mean, in a way, he wanted to be invisible as well. He wanted the sitter to be totally themselves in a way so he would disappear and the sitter would make the painting come alive. It's a very fascinating double edge of how much the artist is in the painting and how much the sitter makes the painting. And also if you were the sitter, if Lucian was painting around you, you had to be there, because he was always responding to, say, the floorboards to you. He couldn't paint the background or the chair without you being there. It was your aura or your electricity that affected the air in the room.
That's interesting.
That's what he was fascinated,
So when he's painting you on a bed and you've got something else to do, and yet he's still got a lot of picture to paint, and it's the wall and the floorboards.
Yeah, you had to.
He's not going to do it. He'll wait for you to be back there.
Yeah.
How
because it affected everything.
Yes.
The painting is about you, and you affect the air in the room. I believe that. But that's what Lucian's interest was in the individual and the person. He was fascinated by the person. And and Lucian's mentioned that he was a feminist. Well, that was what, in a way you can say he is a feminist. He believed in the person, be it a man, a woman, transgender, whatever. It was the individual that fascinated Lucian.
And he's on the side of the sitter. They're empathetic pictures.
Exactly.
Rather than being a detached observer making a representation of the scene he set up in the studio.
Yeah.
It's as if he's trying to occupy the imagination of the model. Did you feel that happening to
Very,
you?
very much, yeah. And that's, what I mentioned earlier. It is that amazing sort of jump between the sitter being the most important thing, or is it the artist? Is it his psychology? And it's it goes between one and the other, I think, on every painting. The more he looked, the more information he would get. And it was that very intense looking for long, long periods that would make him, he felt, find the right information for his truth-telling to become transferred into a painting. He met Francis Bacon, and I think it's Francis Bacon that taught him more than anything how to be a contemporary artist. And it was at that period of knowing Francis that he then changed his style, changed his brushes, and he stood up to paint. Francis spoke very often about how he wanted every ounce of emotion and energy loaded in one brush mark. And that fascinated Lucian. And so when Lucian was changing his brushes, he had that very much running around in his head, how he could, in his language, have this loaded, almost psychological energy in every brush mark that he put down.
So they become not representations of something just skin deep. The actual surfaces of these pictures become almost like the autobiography of the artist, the trace of the artist's hand to add his own indefinable personalities within those marks, like a great Rembrandt or a great Rubens.
Lucian also was in a sense, a very internal person. He didn't really go out into the country much. He didn't go for long walks. He didn't want to use a sort of infinity of landscape, that huge distance that you have in big landscapes. He didn't want that in his painting. So the studio became the whole world. So he was very much an interior, so it had it was psychologically charged in a way, because the whole of the room became the whole world. If Lucian, in the middle of working and there was suddenly an urgent phone call, he would just put the numbers down quickly on the studio walls were used like a diary almost of dates when people were arriving or coming, or phone numbers. So all of that was part of the room.
It's very interesting to see how much the studio does appear almost as this kind of supporting actor in the pictures.
And being incredibly specific.
Yes.
It's not, there's no randomness in his painting. It's just, everything has its own place and it's there for a reason. And so the studio is the world.
So
it's his world.
In a sense, his work is about making art.
Yes.
His art is about the whole drive that he had to make art. And of course he was painting right to the end, until a few hours before he died, wasn't he?
Almost, yeah. The last couple of weeks he was a bit too tired to paint, but he just took to his bed.
And you're in that very last unfinished painting.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit about that? Because it's obviously a very emotive work for you.
Very
because it
much.
marks the end of your relationship with Lucian.
It is very emotive. It's a remarkable achievement to have a very elderly man that's health is failing or his strength is failing, and yet he pushed himself over and over to keep going until he got the painting to as far as he could, that he felt it's okay to show the world this painting. And once he felt the painting had got to that point, I think he let go a bit, and then that's when he went. But he pushed and pushed himself to get the painting to a level that he knew it's good enough to go out into the world. So
that's really interesting. So in a sense, that painting, even though we see it as unfinished,
it's pretty much
finished.
It's pretty much there, 90% finished. The very last marks was Eli,
the dog,
with the ear was just pricked up listening, and his eye was just catching you. That's the last thing he did on the painting, and it brings the focus into the work, just that extra.
The last mark that Lucian Freud, this extraordinary long career, that's his last mark. Well, David, I think that's a moment to leave it, because that's quite a poignant thought. So Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thanks.
Your contribution was obviously very significant in Lucian's life. David, thank you. It's been brilliant talking to you.
Good. Nice to see you again, Colin.